Aaron Copland was born on November 14, 1900 in the Prospect Heights neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York. He was the youngest of 5 in a Lithuanian Jewish family. His father Harris owned a shop that they lived directly above, which Aaron will later compare to a Macy's. His mother Sarah was a singer and a pianist. She would arrange music lessons for Aaron and his siblings. Additionally, Aaron's sister Laureen was a music student who would bring home libretti for Aaron to study, as well as give him piano lessons. Some of Aaron's earliest exposure to music came from Jewish weddings and other ceremonies. He began composing at age 8, which included 7 bars of an opera. 5 years later, Aaron began taking piano lessons with Leopold Wolfson, where he learned much of the standard piano repertoire. After attending a performance by Polish pianist Ignacy Jan Paderewski, Aaron decided he wanted to be a composer. He began studying harmony, theory, and composition under Reuben Goldmark in 1917, which gave him a solid foundation in the Germanic tradition. Aaron will later say of his studies with Goldmark, quote, "This is a stroke of luck for me. I was spared the floundering that so many musicians had suffered through incompetent teaching." Aaron would also say Goldmark had, quote, "little sympathy for the advanced musical idioms of the day," which led to Aaron not sharing his more avant-garde pieces with Goldmark. Aaron would attend performances by the Metropolitan Opera and the New York Symphony, expanding his circle of musical friends. He would also begin studying piano under Victor Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein would call his student, quote, "quiet, shy, well-mannered, and gracious in accepting criticism." It was around this time when Aaron developed a fascination with the Russian Revolution, which led to him being rebuked by his father. He would also develop friendships with many socialist and communist leading individuals. Copland's passion for the latest European music and letters with poet and friend Aaron Schaeffer inspired him to study in Paris. He was further encouraged by an article in Musical America magazine about a summer program for American musicians at the Fontainebleau School of Music. Some notable members of this school included Virgil Thompson, Roy Harris, and Elliott Carter. Copland's father wanted him to go to college in the US, but his mother allowed him to travel to Paris. Once arriving, he began studying piano under Isidore Philippe and composition under Paul Vidal. Copland felt Vidal was too similar to Goldmark, and at the recommendation of a colleague, switched to the well-renowned pedagogue Nadia Boulanger. Copland at first had some reservations about studying under Boulanger, but he grew to like her intelligence and critiquing abilities. He would say this of his teacher in a letter to his brother. Copland planned to study under Boulanger for only a year, but he ended up studying under her for 3. He would attend classes on French history and the French language at the Sorbonne. He would also frequent Shakespeare and Company, an English-language bookstore in Paris that was popular among expatriate American writers, one of which being Ernest Hemingway. After traveling to Italy, Austria, and Germany to finish his studies in Europe, he began writing musical critiques, which helped improve his stature in the music world. Copland returned to the US enthusiastic about his future. He rented an apartment in the Empire Hotel in Manhattan's Upper West Side, where he lived for the next 30 years. Copland lived quite frugally, but was helped in part by 2 Guggenheim fellowships. He would also stay financially afloat through lecture recitals, commissions, teaching, and personal loans. It was around this time when Copland met Boston Symphony director Sergei Kouzavitsky, who would become a very influential figure for the young composer. Musicologist Howard Pollack says that Kouzavitsky was the second most influential person on Copland, behind Boulanger, and that Kouzavitsky performed more of Copland's works than any other conductor at the time. In 1924, Copland wrote Symphony for Organ and Orchestra, which premiered at the Aeolian Hall early the following year and established him as a serious modern composer. Copland met photographer Alfred Stieglitz, adopting his belief that American artists should reflect the, quote, ideas of American democracy. Copland began turning towards jazz and popular music, especially that of composer George Gershwin, singer Bessie Smith, and good old Louis Armstrong. By the end of the 1920s, he went in a more abstract direction. Copland would also begin seeking out contemporaries, including Thompson and Harris, as well as Roger Sessions and Walter Piston. He would establish himself as a spokesman for the composers of his generation, including establishing the Copland Session Concerts to present their works. From 1927 to 1930, Copland taught at the New School for Social Research. His lectures from the school were published in 2 books. He would also write regularly for the New York Times and the Musical Quarterly. Copland was quite protective of his privacy, especially the fact that he was gay. He often traveled with his partners, many of which were much younger than him. Copland met Victor Kraft in 1932 and encouraged him to pursue photography. Kraft would often leave and re-enter Copland's life, with Kraft's erratic behavior stressing the composer. It's believed that the relationship between the two ended sometime during World War II. On a completely unrelated note, Copland's works during this time reflected his belief that the arts should only be accessible to a small group of intellectuals, and that the masses would come to appreciate their efforts. After writing his short symphony in 1933, which wasn't very profitable, he began to rethink his belief. Pollack says that Copland followed the trend of simplifying his musical language, and wanted to attract as wide of an audience as possible. This shift largely follows the German idea of Gebrauchsmusik. Copland would also meet several playwrights and consider projects with all of them. Following his shift in style, Copland began writing music for younger audiences. Some pieces that were resulted from this include his piano album and his opera The Second Hurricane. During the Great Depression, Copland traveled throughout Europe and Africa. He would also regularly travel to Mexico to conduct and became friends with composer Carlos Chavez. Copland would write El Salón Mexico in 1936, experimenting with a simpler, more accessible style. He was then commissioned by CBS to write Prairie Journal for radio broadcast. The piece sought to capture the landscape of the American West. Copland then wrote his ballet Billy the Kid in 1938. It premiered at the Civic Opera House in Chicago, Illinois, to great acclaim. His ballets would establish him as an authentic American composer, filling a vacuum for American choreographers to add to dance repertoire. The same year as the premiere of Billy the Kid, Copland helped form the American Composers Alliance, serving as its president through World War II. He would also begin writing film scores, including Of Mice and Men in 1939 and Our Town in 1940. Critics began accusing him of pandering to the masses, and even his friends were confused by his simpler style. Composer David Diamond would even tell Copland, quote, "By having sold out to the mongrel commercialists halfway already, the danger is going to be wider for you, and I beg you, dear Aaron, don't sell out entirely yet." Copland defended himself by saying his works were a response to the Great Depression's effect on society and the new audiences that came with it. He would say of this, quote, "The composer who is frightened of losing his artistic integrity through contact with a mass audience is no longer aware of the meaning of the word art." The 1940s were the most productive years for Copland, where he would write his most popular works. These included his ballets Rodeo and Appalachian Spring, as well as arguably his most well-known work, Fanfare for the Common Man. Other pieces written around this time include his Third Symphony, his Clarinet Concerto, and 2 more film scores. Copland returned to Europe in 1949, meeting French composer Pierre Boulez. He began adapting elements of Serialism into his music, one of which was a piano quintet in 1950. That same year, Copland wrote Old American Songs, the first set premiering in Aldeburgh with Sir Peter Pears as a soloist. He would also give a series of lectures at Harvard University, which were published in his book Music and Imagination. Copland's style from the 30s and 40s was influenced by the left-wing Popular Front movement. Intellectuals began attacking the movement in the late 1930s, with one historian calling it, quote, "hopelessly middlebrow, a dumbing down of art into toothless entertainment." As mentioned before, Copland was a leftist. Although he never officially joined any political parties, he supported the 1936 Communist Party USA ticket and the 1948 Progressive Party ticket. This led to him being investigated by the FBI during the Red Scare. His name was included on a list of over 150 artists believed to have ties to communism. Copland was called to a private hearing at the U.S. Capitol building and was questioned by prosecutor Roy Cohn and the infamous Senator Joseph McCarthy. They questioned Copland on his international lectures and affiliations with various organizations, ignoring his music, which upheld American values. Copland found himself being blacklisted, with his orchestral work Lincoln Portrait being withdrawn from Dwight D. Eisenhower's inauguration. Musicians defended Copland's works as a banner of patriotism, and Copland began resigning from left-wing groups as early as 1950. He would additionally denounce the lack of artistic freedom in the Soviet Union, claiming it deprived artists of the, quote, "immemorial right of the artist to be wrong." While the FBI investigations were quite taxing on his time, energy, and mental state, they ultimately didn't affect his career or reputation too drastically. Even after the investigations ceased in 1955, Copland remained strongly opposed to the Cold War, believing it was instigated by the U.S. The investigations were officially closed 20 years later. Despite the ongoing investigations, Copland traveled extensively throughout the 1950s. He heard lots of the avant-garde music in Europe, Soviet works not yet known in the West, and experienced the new Polish school of music. He would also hear the music of Japanese composer Toru Takemitsu and began a correspondence with him. Copland revised his books to include the music he encountered in Europe, finding much of what he heard to be dull. He would say of aleatoric or chance music, quote, "I spent most of my life trying to get the right note in the right place. Just throwing it open to chance seems to go against my natural instincts." Copland was commissioned by pianist William Koppel to write Piano Fantasy, which became his first serial work. Writing the piece was challenging for Copland, as he spent 6 years on it. But before Koppel could premiere the piece, he tragically died in a plane crash in 1953. The premiere would be given by William Masellos 4 years later and was well received. Music critic Jay Rosenfeld would say of the piece, quote, "This is a new Copland to us, an artist advancing with strength and not building on the past alone." Copland was then commissioned by the League of Composers to write an opera for TV. He was aware of the logistical issues of the genre, including weak libretti and demanding production schedules. The commission resulted in The Tenderland in 1954, and although the libretto wasn't very good, as Copland predicted, it remains one of the few American operas to enter standard repertoire. Copland would then serve as the music director of the Ojai Music Festival in 1957. Starting in the 1960s, Copland shifted his focus from composing to conducting, partially due to a lack of ideas for compositions. He became a frequent guest conductor in the US and the UK, and made a series of recordings for Columbia Records. Despite this shift away from composing, some pieces written around this time include Connotations for Orchestra and Night Thoughts, written as a homage to composer Charles Ives. Copland would collaborate with American musicologist Vivian Perilous on a 2-volume autobiography. Some controversy would arise as the second volume largely relied on old documents for sources, although this might have been due to Copland's Alzheimer's, which began to deteriorate his health in the 1980s. Copland's last completed work was Proclamation for Piano, which was orchestrated by Philip Ramey in 1985. Finally, on December 2, 1990, Aaron Copland died of respiratory failure in North Tarrytown, New York. His ashes were scattered over the Tanglewood Music Center in Massachusetts. Additionally, his estate would be bequeathed to the creation of the Aaron Copland Fund for Music, which bestows around $600,000 a year to various performing groups. According to Perilous in Copland 1900 through 1942, Copland's method to composing was to write down fragments of musical ideas as they came to him, and would use these fragments when he needed a piece. If a fragment looked promising, he would write out a piano sketch of it. Copland was somewhat embarrassed by his method until he learned that it was also used by Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. Perilous claimed the piano was, quote, so integral to his composing that it permeated his compositional style, not only in the frequent use in the instrument, but in more subtle and complex ways. Copland wouldn't consider the instrumentation until the piece was completed, and he often wrote sections in no particular order. Some composers who influenced him include Chopin, Debussy, Verdi, Ravel, Satie, and the members of Les Six, but his largest influence would be his former teacher Boulanger. Copland's earlier works consisted of short piano pieces and art songs, largely inspired by jazz. He experimented with ambiguous beginnings and endings, rapid key changes, and frequent use of tritones. Copland's middle period in the mid-1930s was very popular compared to his earlier works, many of which were derived from folk tunes. In their book Aaron Copland and His World, musicologists Carol Oja and Judith Tick argued that Copland's use of folk tunes differed from someone like Bartók. Where Bartók aimed to preserve folk tunes and be as faithful to the original as possible, Copland enhanced folk tunes with contemporary rhythms, textures, and structures. One way he did this was with syncopation. In regards to his ballets, Copland preserved the American atmosphere, with musicologist Elliot Antokolitz saying the, quote, conservative handling of open diatonic sonorities created a pastoral quality. Copland's film scores largely reflected his own style, where the common practice in film scoring at the time was to borrow from late Romanticism. He notably rejected the use of the leitmotif, preferring to match scenes with actions on screen. Many film scores in the Western genre will be influenced by Copland. Copland's works after World War II began incorporating the 12-tone technique, but he wouldn't fully embrace the technique. His works during this period were a mix of serial and non-serial, and went back and forth between tonal and non-tonal. Copland would mentor hundreds of young composers, operating largely outside of an academic setting. He emphasized a focus on expressiveness rather than developing a personal style. His generous treatment of young composers earned him the title Dean of American Music. Amen, brother. One of Copland's students would say of his teacher, quote, he didn't want to turn you into another Aaron Copland. When he questioned something, it was in a manner that might make you want to question it yourself. Everything he said was helpful in making a younger composer realize the potential of a particular work. Copland was also a successful conductor, modeling a style after Stravinsky and German composer Paul Hindemith. Copland became especially in demand after he conducted a televised performance of the New York Philharmonic. He would also record nearly all of his works with himself as the conductor. Additionally, many of Copland's works remain in the standard American repertoire, with Pollock calling him, quote, the most distinctive and identifiable musical voice produced by this country so far. Copland's mix of influence and inclinations helped create a notably American character, helping to define American classical music. He would be awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1964. Swiss-American conductor Leon Botstein would say of Copland, quote, the notion that his music played not a subsidiary but a central role in the shaping of the national consciousness makes Copland uniquely interesting, for the historian as well as the musician. Other interesting facts about Copland include his music being remixed by many popular bands, most notably Emerson, Lake and Palmer in 1977, and he had a brief relationship with Leonard Bernstein.